The sun beat down on Maple Street with unforgiving intensity that Saturday afternoon. Marcus Chen wiped sweat from his brow as he tore rotted boards from the porch of the Victorian home he'd purchased just 3 days earlier. The once grand house, with its peeling paint, sagging gutters, and overgrown yard, had been the neighborhood eyesore for years before Marcus had seen its potential beneath the decay. As the new owner of 1487 Maple Street, he was determined to restore the property to its former glory, one splinter-filled board at a time. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" The shrill voice cut through the peaceful neighborhood air like a table saw through pine. Marcus turned to find a woman with immaculate blonde highlights and designer sunglasses perched on her head standing at the edge of his property. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her foot tapped an impatient rhythm against the sidewalk. Her lips were pressed into a thin line that suggested she'd already made up her mind about something, and it wasn't in Marcus's favor. "I'm renovating," Marcus replied simply, gesturing to the obvious pile of debris and the tools scattered across the lawn. He turned back to his work, hoping the interaction would end there. It didn't. "You can't just come into our neighborhood and start destroying property," the woman said, her voice rising an octave. "This is a historic district. There are rules." Marcus sighed, setting down his crowbar. "Ma'am, I'm the owner. I closed on this house 3 days ago." The woman's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You're the owner." Her gaze swept over Marcus's sweat-stained t-shirt, cargo shorts, and work boots. "I don't believe you. The Hendersons owned this home for 40 years. The Hendersons moved to Florida last month," Marcus explained patiently. "I purchased the property from them. I have all the paperwork inside if you'd like to see it." He tried to keep his tone light, though irritation was beginning to simmer beneath the surface. "I most certainly would like to see it," the woman snapped, taking a step onto his property. "And while you're at it, I'd like to see your permits for this demolition." Marcus glanced at the porch. He was replacing rotted boards, not conducting a demolition. "I don't need permits to replace damaged wood on my own property." "That's not for you to decide," she countered. "I'm on the neighborhood association board, and I know the rules. I haven't seen any permit applications cross my desk." Marcus felt a headache forming behind his eyes. "The neighborhood association doesn't issue permits. The city does, and minor repairs don't require. This doesn't look minor to me." The woman pulled out her phone and began taking photos. "I'm documenting everything. A historical commission will want to see this." A neighbor emerged from the house next door, curiosity evident on his face. "Everything okay, Karen?" he called out. "No, everything's not okay, Dave," the woman, Karen, replied without taking her eyes off Marcus. "This man claims he's the new owner and is tearing the place apart without proper authorization." Dave looked uncomfortable. "Well, I did see the moving truck a few days ago." Karen waved him off. "That doesn't mean anything. For all we know, he could be squatting." She turned back to Marcus, her voice lowering to a threatening whisper. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I've worked very hard to maintain its character. I won't let someone like you come in and destroy it." The emphasis on someone like you wasn't lost on Marcus. He felt his temper flare, but he tamped it down. "I am the legal owner of this property, and I'm doing necessary repairs. Now, if you'll excuse me." "I've heard enough." Karen's thumb moved rapidly over her phone screen. "I'm calling the police. They can sort this out." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "You're calling the police? On me? For fixing my own porch?" "For suspicious activity and potential property damage," Karen corrected, lifting the phone to her ear. "Yes, hello? I'd like to report a man trespassing and vandalizing a historic property on Maple Street." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, wondering how his first weekend as a homeowner had come to this. Marcus sat on his porch steps, building permit and property deeds spread across his knees as the police cruiser pulled up to the curb. The neighborhood had come alive in the 20 minutes since Karen's call. Faces peering from windows, dog walkers slow in their pace, and several neighbors openly standing on their lawns to witness the unfolding drama. Karen straightened her blouse and adjusted her sunglasses as 2 officers approached. "Thank goodness you're here, officers," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "This situation has been most distressing." The taller officer, whose nameplate read Rodriguez, glanced between Karen and Marcus with a neutral expression that suggested this wasn't his first neighborhood dispute. His partner, Officer Chen, was already eyeing the paperwork in Marcus's hands. "I understand there's a concern about property damage," Officer Rodriguez asked, directing his question to Karen but keeping Marcus in his peripheral vision. Karen launched into her narrative immediately. "This man showed up today and started tearing apart the Henderson place. When I questioned him, he claimed to be the owner, but the Hendersons have owned this home for decades. They would never sell without informing the neighborhood association. We have protocols." Marcus couldn't help but roll his eyes, which Karen caught immediately. "See his attitude?" she hissed. This is exactly what I'm talking about. No respect for our community or its history. Officer Chen stepped forward. Sir, do you have some identification and proof of ownership? Right here, Marcus said, handing over his driver's license along with the property deed and settlement papers. I closed on the house Tuesday. The Hendersons retired to Florida last month. Officer Chen examined the documents carefully while Officer Rodriguez maintained a professional distance between Karen and Marcus. These appear to be in order, Officer Chen said after a moment. The deed transfer is properly registered with the county. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Well, that doesn't explain why he's demolishing a historic property without permits. Marcus sighed. I'm not demolishing anything. I'm replacing rotted boards on the porch. Basic home maintenance. And the permits, Karen demanded. Marcus held up a city-issued document. I have a general renovation permit for non-structural repairs, which covers porch maintenance. I filed it the day after closing. Officer Rodriguez took the permit, examined it, and nodded. This is valid, ma'am. But the historical commission, Karen sputtered. I spoke with them yesterday, and Marcus interjected calmly. Since I'm not changing the appearance or structure, just replacing damaged materials with identical ones, they had no objections. In fact, they were pleased someone was finally addressing the safety hazards. A look of genuine confusion crossed Karen's face, as though the possibility that Marcus had actually followed proper channels had never occurred to her. I don't understand. I'm on the neighborhood association board. I should have been notified. The sale was public record, Officer Chen pointed out gently, and homeowners aren't legally required to notify neighborhood associations of property transfers. An older gentleman with silver hair approached from across the street. Karen, I tried to tell you at the last meeting. Gene Henderson sent an email to the entire board about the sale. Remember, it was in that batch of messages about the summer block party. Karen's face flushed. I don't recall that specific email, Harold. Harold turned to Marcus with an apologetic smile. Marcus Chen, right? Gene mentioned you're an architect specializing in historic restorations. Said that's partly why they chose your offer. They knew you'd take care of the place. The neighbors who had gathered began to murmur. Several nodded approvingly at this information. Karen's expression had transformed from righteous indignation to dawning embarrassment. The officers exchanged a knowing glance. Well then, Officer Rodriguez said, handing the documents back to Marcus. It seems everything is in order here. Sorry for the interruption to your work, sir. No problem, Marcus replied, though the time lost was frustrating. Ma'am, Officer Chen addressed Karen, in the future, perhaps a friendly introduction would be a better first approach than calling the police. Karen's lips thinned to a barely visible line. I was only trying to protect the neighborhood, she insisted, though her voice had lost its earlier conviction. As the officers returned to their vehicle, the small crowd of neighbors began to disperse, all except for Harold and a woman in her 30s holding a container of what appeared to be lemonade. I'm Aisha from across the street, the woman said, offering Marcus the container. Thought you might be thirsty, and I wanted to apologize for, well, this welcome to the neighborhood. Harold chuckled. Karen means well, but she's a bit invested in community standards, Marcus suggested diplomatically. That's one way to put it, Harold agreed with a wink. Karen remained rooted to her spot on the sidewalk, watching this exchange with an expression that suggested she was recalculating everything. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and marched down the street toward a pristine colonial with immaculate landscaping. Marcus took a long drink of the lemonade, thanking Aisha. As his new neighbors chatted about the neighborhood's history, he caught sight of Karen peeking through her living room curtains, phone pressed to her ear. Something told him that this wasn't over yet. The neighborhood buzzed with activity as the weekend progressed. Marcus had made significant progress on the porch by Sunday afternoon, with several neighbors stopping by to introduce themselves, some bringing food, others offering tools or assistance. The embarrassing confrontation with Karen had transformed into an impromptu community welcome. The latest is that she's called an emergency meeting of the neighborhood association for Tuesday evening, Dave reported, passing Marcus a bottle of water as they took a break from securing new railings. Something about reviewing the protocols for property transfers and renovations. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. Does she realize I don't actually need the association's permission? Oh, she knows, Dave chuckled. But Karen's been the unofficial neighborhood watchdog for years. The Henderson place has been her pet project, always complaining about its condition, but never actually helping the elderly couple who couldn't maintain it anymore. That doesn't make sense, Marcus said, frowning. If she cared about the house, wouldn't she be happy someone's fixing it? Harold, who had returned with sandwiches from his wife, settled onto a lawn chair they'd set up in the shade. Karen doesn't actually care about the house. She cares about control. Gene Henderson told my wife that Karen had been pressuring them to sell to her nephew. some developer who wanted to modernize the interior while keeping the historic facade. Marcus almost choked on his water. That would ruin the architectural integrity of the place. Exactly, Harold nodded. But it would have given Karen influence over the project. Where the Hendersons chose you instead, well, I became public enemy number one, Marcus finished. Speaking of which, Dave murmured, nodding toward the street. Karen was marching purposefully toward them, a tall man in an expensive suit trailing behind her. Her expression was a mixture of triumph and barely contained rage. Mr. Chen, she called out sharply. I need a word. Marcus stood, brushing sawdust from his jeans. Hello again, Karen. This is Jeffrey Winters, she announced, gesturing to the man beside her. He's the city's code enforcement officer. I've asked him to inspect your work. The man in question looked deeply uncomfortable. Actually, I'm the assistant director of building services. Someone from my office would normally handle routine inspections, but I explained the urgency of the situation, Karen interrupted. How the historical character of our entire neighborhood is at risk. Marcus maintained a neutral expression. I'm happy to show Mr. Winters my permits and the work I've done. The official nodded gratefully. That would be helpful, thank you. As the three of them walked up to the porch, Marcus couldn't help but notice that most of his new neighbors had found reasons to linger nearby, watching the interaction unfold. As you can see, Marcus explained, I'm replacing like with like. Original wood species where possible, matching profiles on the balusters, and I've been careful to preserve any salvageable original elements. He pulled out his phone, showing before and after pictures that documented each step. Mr. Winters looked increasingly impressed. This is actually excellent preservation work. Are you in the trades? I'm an architect specializing in historic restoration, Marcus confirmed. He claims to be, Karen interjected. But I've been researching. Ms. Harrington, Mr. Winters cut in firmly. I recognize Mr. Chen from the Westlake Municipal Building Restoration Project last year. His firm received a preservation award from the mayor. Karen's mouth snapped shut. In fact, the official continued, turning back to Marcus with genuine interest. We have several historic properties coming up for adaptive reuse downtown. Your expertise would be valuable on our planning committee. Before Marcus could respond, the rumble of a large truck drew everyone's attention to the street. A landscaping vehicle was pulling up in front of Karen's house with evergreen lawn and tree emblazoned on its side. Karen's face drained of color. A worker hopped out and approached. Ms. Harrington, we're here about the oak tree removal you scheduled. An audible gasp rippled through the gathered neighbors. The massive oak tree in Karen's front yard was at least a century old and a neighborhood landmark. That's not today, Karen stammered. It's supposed to be next week when no one is. She trailed off, realizing what she'd admitted. Harold stepped forward, his earlier friendly demeanor replaced with quiet fury. That oak is on the Historical Society's protected list, Karen. Any removal requires community review and approval. It's dropping acorns on my lawn, Karen protested weakly. And the roots are affecting my foundation. Have you filed for permits? Mr. Winters asked, his professional interest clearly piqued. Karen's silence was answer enough. So let me get this straight, Dave said, barely containing his amusement. You called the police on Marcus for replacing rotten boards with proper permits, while you were secretly planning to remove a protected tree without any authorization whatsoever. That's completely different, Karen sputtered. Mr. Winters cleared his throat. Actually, Ms. Harrington, unpermitted removal of a historically designated tree carries significant penalties. I'll need to write this up. As the official pulled out a notepad, Marcus couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for Karen, whose face had progressed from shock to mortification. Her carefully constructed neighborhood authority was crumbling in real time. Mr. Winters, Marcus said quietly, perhaps there's a middle ground here. The tree specialists could assess if some selective pruning might address Ms. Harrington's concerns without removing the tree entirely. If there are legitimate foundation issues, there are other solutions that preserve the oak. The official considered this. That would be a reasonable approach, assuming Ms. Harrington follows proper channels from now on. All eyes turned to Karen, who stood frozen in humiliation. For a moment, Marcus thought she might explode in rage or storm off. Instead, something unexpected happened. Her shoulders slumped and the imperious facade cracked. Fine, she said quietly. I'll file the proper paperwork. As the small crowd dispersed and Mr. Winters headed off with the landscapers to inspect the oak, Karen lingered at the edge of Marcus' property. The fight seemed to have drained out of her. Why would you help me? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. After everything? Marcus shrugged. Because we're neighbors, and because sometimes people get so caught up in rules that they forget why those rules exist in the first place, to preserve what matters while allowing for necessary change and growth. Karen studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, reluctant nod before turning to walk back to her house. Dave clapped a hand on Marcus's shoulder. You know, you just confused the hell out of her worldview, right? Good. Marcus replied with a smile, picking up his hammer once more. Maybe that's the first step to actually becoming neighbors. 2 weeks passed in relative calm. Marcus's porch renovation was nearly complete, the fresh white paint gleaming in the spring sunshine. The neighborhood association meeting had come and gone without incident. Karen had been conspicuously absent, sending a brief email about a family emergency that no one quite believed. On a bright Wednesday afternoon, Marcus was installing the final decorative brackets under the eaves when a sleek silver Audi pulled into Karen's driveway. A young man in an expensive suit emerged, his gaze immediately landing on the Henderson house, now officially the Chen house, with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read from a distance. Marcus continued his work, though he kept one eye on the visitor. After a brief conversation on Karen's porch, both she and the young man began walking directly toward him. Incoming, Marcus muttered to himself, descending the ladder. Mr. Chen, Karen called out, her tone stiffly formal. This is my nephew, Blake Harrington. He's a developer specializing in historic properties. Blake stepped forward with a practiced smile. Ms. Harrington is my father's sister, he clarified smoothly. The family resemblance is in the determination, not the name. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag before shaking Blake's offered hand. Nice to meet you. Blake was the one interested in purchasing this property, Karen explained, her eyes darting between the two men. He had some lovely plans for modernization that would have destroyed the original interior craftsmanship, Blake interrupted, surprising both Marcus and Karen, which is why I'm actually here. Karen's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. May I? Blake gestured toward the house. Marcus hesitated only briefly before nodding. Sure, come on in. It's still a work in progress. As they entered through the newly restored front door, Blake let out a low whistle. The Hendersons really let this place go, didn't they? But I can see what you're doing here. He ran an appreciative hand along the original oak banister that Marcus had spent days carefully stripping and refinishing. You're preserving rather than replacing, Blake observed. Most people wouldn't take the time. Marcus studied Karen's nephew with newfound interest. I thought you were into gutting these places and putting in open-concept kitchens and granite countertops. Blake laughed. That's my business model for properties without significant interior architectural value. But this place, he gestured to the intricate ceiling medallions and original pocket doors. This deserves respect. Karen, who had been following them silently, seemed completely bewildered by this exchange. Blake, I thought you said this house was perfect for your historic facade, modern living concept, she finally asked. Her nephew had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. That was before I actually got inside. The Hendersons never let me past the foyer. From what they described and the condition of the exterior, I assumed the interior was similarly deteriorated. It was definitely neglected, Marcus confirmed, but structurally sound. The craftsmanship is incredible. You don't see this level of detail in modern construction. That's actually why I'm here, Blake said, turning to face Marcus directly. I have a client, older woman, serious money, serious preservationist. She bought the Whitman mansion on Sycamore Street. The exterior is intact, but the interior was remodeled in the 1970s. Marcus winced. Crime against architecture. Exactly. She wants to restore it to period-appropriate condition, but finding people who understand true restoration rather than just renovation. Blake shrugged. Your reputation precedes you. I drove by last week and saw what you were doing with the porch. A historical society president mentioned your name as well. Karen's head swiveled between them like she was watching a tennis match. You want to hire me? Marcus clarified. As a consultant, yes. Your firm handles the architectural plans, mine handles the construction. My client gets a historically accurate restoration and we both make money. Blake pulled out a business card. Think about it. No rush. Marcus took the card, genuinely intrigued. I'll give you a call. As they walked back outside, Karen finally found her voice. You two are going to work together. After everything? Blake looked confused. After what? An uncomfortable silence fell as Karen realized her nephew had no idea about her campaign against Marcus or the police incident. Nothing, she said quickly. Just neighborhood association business. Marcus caught her eye, and in that moment, an unspoken agreement passed between them. Just some confusion about permits and protocols. All sorted out now. Blake looked unconvinced but didn't press the issue. After arranging to meet Marcus later in the week to discuss the Whitman project, he headed back to his car. When they were alone, Karen stared at her shoes for a long moment before speaking. You didn't have to do that. Not mention what happened. Seemed unnecessary, Marcus replied with a small shrug. Karen's lips pressed together, her internal struggle visible on her face. Finally, she took a deep breath. The tree service is coming tomorrow, just for pruning and root assessment, like you suggested. The words seemed physically difficult for her to say. The Historical Society is sending someone to supervise. Marcus nodded. Smart approach. Another painful silence stretched between them before Karen squared her shoulders. I may have been hasty in my initial assessment of your intentions for the property. Marcus bit back a smile. Coming from Karen, this was practically a groveling apology. Protecting neighborhood character is important, he offered diplomatically. We just have different approaches. Yes, well. Karen smoothed her already impeccable hair. The neighborhood association is hosting a welcome reception for new residents next Saturday. 4 to 6 at the community center. She said this as though reading from a script. As the newest homeowner, your attendance would be appropriate. Marcus recognized the olive branch for what it was. I'll be there. Karen gave a single definitive nod, then turned to go. She had made it halfway down the walkway when she paused and turned back. That pendant light in your dining room, she said stiffly. It's not original to the house. Marcus blinked in surprise. No, it's not. How did you? I have photographs of many neighborhood interiors from the Historical Society archives. The Henderson house had a specific Art Nouveau chandelier in that space. She hesitated, then added, I have a similar one in my attic. It came from my grandmother's house, but it's not right for my decor. Colonial Revival doesn't mix with Art Nouveau. Marcus was genuinely startled by the offer implicit in her words. That's very generous. Karen waved a dismissive hand, already retreating. It's gathering dust. Better to have it where it belongs. I'll have Blake bring it over when he comes to see you. With that, she marched back to her house, her posture as rigid as ever. From across the street, Harold gave Marcus a thumbs up. Did I just witness a miracle? He called out. Marcus laughed. More like a temporary ceasefire, but I'll take it. As the sun began to set over the neighborhood, casting a golden glow on the freshly restored porch, Marcus couldn't help but feel that he had won something more valuable than just the right to renovate in peace. In an unexpected way, Karen's misplaced call to the police had set in motion a series of events that might actually build community rather than division. Of course, he had no illusions that Karen had undergone a complete personality transformation. But sometimes, Marcus reflected as he put away his tools for the day, the smallest crack in the most rigid facade was all you needed to begin a true restoration. 3 months later, Marcus stood on his fully restored porch, admiring the warm evening light as it bathed the street in golden hues. The transformation of the once dilapidated Victorian was remarkable. Fresh paint in historically accurate colors, meticulously restored woodwork, and gardens beginning to take shape in what had been an overgrown yard. Neighbors regularly slowed their walks to compliment the revival, and twice the local paper had sent photographers to document the restoration process. Quite the before and after, Dave remarked, handing Marcus a cold beer as they settled into the new porch chairs. Hard to believe it's the same place. Hard to believe it's the same neighborhood, Marcus replied with a chuckle. Indeed, something had shifted on Maple Street in the months since that infamous Saturday when Karen had called the police. The collaboration between Marcus and Blake Harrington on the Whitman mansion had blossomed into multiple projects, bringing attention to the neighborhood's historic character and spurring other homeowners to undertake their own preservation efforts. Property values had already seen a modest increase, and there was talk of the area being featured in a regional home tour. Speaking of transformations, Dave murmured, nodding toward the street. Karen was approaching, clipboard in hand and determination in her stride. Over the past months, she had maintained a cordial, if somewhat stiff relationship with Marcus. The Art Nouveau chandelier now hanging in his dining room had been the start of an unexpected detente, followed by increasingly frequent, if brief, conversations about historical accuracy and preservation techniques. While they would never be best friends, they had found common ground in their appreciation for the neighborhood's architectural heritage. Good evening, gentlemen, Karen greeted them, her tone businesslike but not unfriendly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Marcus replied, gesturing to an empty chair. Care to join us? Karen hesitated only briefly before taking a seat, perching on the edge as though ready for a quick escape. I'd wanted to discuss the proposal for the historic district designation. After the incident with the oak tree, Karen had channeled her energy into a legitimate project, securing official historic district status for their neighborhood. The protection this would provide aligned perfectly with Marcus's values, and he had become an unlikely ally in her campaign. The commission meets next Tuesday, she continued, passing him a document. They've asked for an expert to speak about the architectural significance of the area. Blake suggested you might be willing. Marcus reviewed the paperwork. I'd be happy to. This is important for the neighborhood. A flicker of something like satisfaction crossed Karen's face. Excellent. I prepared some talking points, but of course you'll have your own perspective to add. Dave smothered a smile. Karen's version of collaboration still involved a healthy dose of control, but progress was progress. Oh, before I forget, Karen added, reaching into her bag and producing a small, worn photograph. I found this in the Historical Society archives yesterday. I thought you might want a copy. Marcus accepted the black and white image of his house, dated 1902. The family stood proudly on the very porch where they now sat, the original details clearly visible. This is incredible, he said genuinely. Thank you. Karen nodded, a touch of pride in her expression. The craftsmanship back then was remarkable. Those porch balusters you restored, they're unique to this house. The architect incorporated elements of both Victorian and Craftsman styles, which was quite progressive for the time. I noticed that, Marcus replied, impressed by her knowledge. The interior moldings have similar hybrid characteristics. Dave glanced between them with amusement. I'm going to get another beer before you two start discussing the historical significance of doorknobs. He retreated inside, leaving them alone on the porch. A comfortable silence settled between them as they both looked out at the neighborhood. Several houses down, a young couple was beginning their own restoration project, frequently consulting with Marcus and occasionally, to everyone's surprise, with Karen as well. I've been meaning to ask, Marcus said finally. What made you change your mind? About me, I mean. Karen straightened in her chair, staring directly ahead. For a moment, he thought she might deflect the question or leave. Instead, she sighed. My father was a master carpenter, she said quietly. He restored historic homes all his life. Not the fancy architectural work you do, but the hands-on craftsmanship. He taught me to recognize quality workmanship and to value heritage. Her fingers traced the edge of her clipboard. When Blake said you were preserving rather than replacing, it reminded me of my father's approach. Marcus hadn't expected such a personal revelation. He sounds like someone I would have respected. He would have liked what you've done here, Karen admitted, gesturing to the porch restoration. He always said you could tell a person's character by how they treated historic woodwork. High praise, Marcus said with a smile. Karen's posture relaxed slightly. The neighborhood has changed so much in recent years. So many flippers and developers cutting corners, installing cheap materials, erasing history for the sake of open floor plans and farmhouse sinks. A hint of her old indignation crept into her voice. I perhaps became overzealous in my defense of our architectural heritage. Overzealous is one word for it, Marcus teased gently. To his surprise, Karen's lips quirked in what might almost be described as a smile. Yes, well, my methods may have been imperfect. She stood, smoothing her slacks. The designation committee meets at the library at 7 on Tuesday. Business casual is appropriate. Marcus stood as well. I'll be there. Karen nodded, turning to leave, but paused at the top of the porch steps. For what it's worth, Mr. Chen, I'm glad the Hendersons chose you. The admission seemed to cost her considerable effort. The house deserved someone who would respect its history. Thank you, Marcus replied, genuinely touched. And please, after all this, I think you can call me Marcus. Perhaps, Karen said, the ghost of a real smile appearing briefly. We'll see. As she walked away, Dave emerged from the house with fresh beers. Was that almost a human moment from Karen Harrington? Marcus accepted the beer with a laugh. Progress comes in small steps like restoration. You don't transform overnight. Speaking of transformation, Dave said, settling back into his chair, have you heard about Mrs. Patterson's plans for that mid-century modern on Elm Street? Karen's having an absolute fit about the proposed color scheme. Some things never change. Marcus grinned, raising his bottle in a toast. Thank goodness for that. A completely reformed Karen would throw off the neighborhood's delicate ecosystem. As the sun set over Maple Street, neighbors waved from passing cars or called greetings from adjacent yards. In the distance, Karen could be seen pausing to inspect and inevitably critique the young couple's porch restoration efforts. The police had never returned to Marcus' property, and the story of Karen calling the cops on the actual homeowner had become neighborhood legend, retold at barbecues and block parties with increasing embellishment. Karen herself endured these retellings with grudging tolerance, occasionally correcting factual inaccuracies, but never denying her role in the drama. In the end, Marcus reflected, what had begun as an adversarial encounter had catalyzed something unexpected. Not just the physical restoration of a neglected home, but the strengthening of a community's connections and the gradual, imperfect rehabilitation of a neighborhood watchdog who had perhaps lost sight of what she was truly guarding. Some renovations weren't visible from the street, but they were no less significant for their subtlety. And like any good restoration, the most successful ones preserved the essential character while allowing for necessary growth and change. Marcus raised his beer toward Karen's retreating figure, a private toast to unlikely allies and the surprising ways neighborhoods and people could evolve while honoring their authentic foundations.